Hello and welcome. This is our special virtual event that we hold after every issue, but for this issue, it's even more so because it's a special issue. Everything in it is on one theme. I'm Dayen, the executive editor of the American Prospect, and this is our How We Broke the Supply Chain issue, where we go into how misguided policy led to the supply chain crunch that we're all feeling right now with shortages and higher prices and all the chaos that is happening in our commerce. And I wanted to start this event by bringing on Rakeen Mabud. We were lucky enough to have Groundwork Collaborative be our partner on this project. That was really momentous. I mean, it took a look at every aspect of the supply chain, which you'll hear about in this event, and integrated how these policies came to be and how we ended up with this situation. So Rakeen is the chief economist at Groundwork Collaborative, and Rakeen, thank you for coming on and welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's been such a wonderful experience collaborating with you and your team.
Absolutely. So Rakeen and I wrote the intro to this package. And I know it was very important to me, and I want to get your thoughts on this as well, that we really dialed back to look at where this all came from. I mean, we know that we have these shortages, which are supposed to be unthinkable in a market economy. We have this inflation that we haven't seen in 40 years. And we really wanted to try to delve down into the origins of it and why is this happening, and maybe learn some lessons from that. So could you tell me about sort of your experience with trying to figure this out and what you ultimately determined?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I think, the conversation right now is really focused on a lot of things that people can feel and experience. They're feeling shortages, they're feeling higher prices, they're feeling, goods that they want are kind of coming at unpredictable times. And I think there's a tendency to want to blame that on really proximate factors, something like the pandemic, right? That is, disrupting our lives in every possible way right now. But it was really important for us at Groundwork, and I know, throughout the piece we wrote together, to really kind of pull back that layer and explain how the pandemic was a catalyst, not a cause, right? That the issues that we've been facing right now have actually been decades in the making, and they're not an accident either, right? They're the result of decades of policy choices, from deregulation to kind of turning our economy and our supply chains over to Wall Street and the financialization that resulted from that. And it was really great to be able to kind of pull that back and go 1, 2, 3, 4 layers deeper and really explain, these are policy choices we've made. They're also policy choices we can undo, which, the rest of the issue really gets into beautifully.
Yeah, and there were policy choices that we really didn't get a vote on. I mean, no election in the last 40 years was determined on the basis of how we're going to manage our supply chain, really, right? I mean, some of these issues that ended up coming up around it were parts of campaigns, things like offshoring and globalization. But there was this rough sort of bipartisan consensus that was built around these issues over a long period of time that, free trade is great. We can specialize and move off our various production needs, manufacturing needs to other countries. We can become a service economy. We can have this logistics system that's super efficient and bring things in only as we need it and make things very cheap for everyone. And the bargain of that is low prices, right? We do all these things, and while there may be some attendant harms to regions of the country that we're doing manufacturing or the quality of jobs more generally, we're going to give you low prices, and that is going to have this powerful effect of lifting up your standard of living. And so, we didn't get a choice in that, right? And I mean, that's the thing that strikes me the most about this, that it was sort of rendered from on high, and this choice was made for us. And that makes it hard to make anyone accountable when it blows up,
Right. And we didn't get a choice in this matter, in the matter of supply chains. We also didn't get a choice in the ways that our economy is set up this way, right? In many ways, the supply chain is just, and the dynamics we're seeing there, the power imbalances we're seeing there are just a microcosm of the power imbalances we see throughout our economy. I mean, the issue really kind of hones in on consolidation of and deregulation of the trucking industry, and consolidation and deregulation of the shipping industry. And it's not just limited to these kind of beats along our supply chain. It's actually throughout our economy, we see an incredible amount of power going to these mega corporations, all at the expense of good jobs, of small businesses, of consumers and families all around the country. And that's been going on for decades.
Yeah, and Groundwork's really great on literally grounding this in a level that is at not just the consumer, but workers, communities, small businesses, and things of that nature. So, I mean, that's one of the things that I think is most interesting about this issue. Could you tell me about how this affects workers specifically? Let's start there. And how this legacy of deregulation, of consolidation, of rule by Wall Street, where they sort of dictate the rules of how the supply chain works, how our commerce works, how does that affect workers at a basic level?
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the sort of just-in-time supply system, and one of the things that I was really excited about exploring in this issue and in the piece we wrote together is how workers are such an important part of that just-in-time supply system, right? So we have this knife-edge system where one factory going down because of a COVID outbreak or because of an extreme weather event can just throw the whole system out of whack. But what we often don't think about is that it's not just factories, it's also people, right? And over the course of decades, what we've seen is a real reliance and over-reliance on incredibly precarious labor. Trucking is a really great example. I mean, I think it's about 80% of port truckers are independent contractors, which means that they don't have good wages, they don't have any benefits. Many of them can't even use the bathroom at the ports because they're not considered employees. I mean, that's not any way to treat anyone. And the moral cost of that is enormous, of course, but there's also an enormous economic cost of really allowing ourselves to fall prey to just rock bottom labor standards. And that has all come about, again, that's not an accident. That has come about because we have deregulated the trucking industry, because none of these workers are unionized, and in fact, legally they can't be if they're independent contractors. And so it was really important to focus in on how our reliance on precarious labor is an incredible liability in the functioning of this entire system that we all rely on every day.
One of the things that was really amazing in the shipping piece that Amir Kafaji did for us, he talks to a worker who has been stuck on a container ship for 15 months. And this is a unionized employee. He's a Filipino seafarer named Vince Valeriano. However, the way that the global shipping system works is that you are liable to the labor laws of the flag that you fly as that ship. And no country like the United States or an industrialized nation is a flag that is used in the global shipping industry. They're called flags of convenience, and the flag that is flown by that person's ship is from the Marshall Islands, and so they have a Marshall Islands level of labor standards on this ship. It really is like sort of the realization of a dream of multinational corporations, where like, can we have this floating island that we can use the lowest labor standards absolutely possible and apply them to this workforce. And of course, as that is happening in the shipping industry, 10 times as much money was in profit was made this year as in previous years. It's like the entire 2010 to 2020 combined was not as much profit as what shipping companies made in 2021. And is any of that being shared with the workers? Is any of that being gone into bettering these labor conditions? No, because deregulating these industries and making them super cheap is what keeps this engine running. It's what allows you to make everything in China and ship it to the United States, because it's much, much cheaper if you don't have to pay your workforce.
Right, and it's just such a perfect encapsulation of the real effect that financialization has had on our economy, right? Because we have these Wall Street firms who are demanding short-term profits above all else. They don't care about labor standards. They don't care about redundancy. They don't care about the resiliency of a system, which is exactly how we got to where we are today, by the way, right? We just have this incredibly brittle system that has prioritized short-term profits over all else. And that's really what we need to start to flip around, because our economy doesn't work when people are not doing well. Our supply chains aren't going to work when people are not doing well. And I think this issue does an incredible job of shining a light on how something that is often feels really amorphous is actually really grounded in, in people who are working in factories, people on ships, in people driving trucks, in the consumers and the small businesses who kind of sit at the end of that chain. It's an incredibly important light that the issue is shining.
And one of the things that I know that Groundwork has really been involved in is the ways in which Wall Street's desire for short-term profits has shown up in the pricing decisions that companies have been making, using the inflation, which is real, like the increased shipping costs and increased delays for various products, using that, but then padding on top of that and increasing prices well above inputs. You've been doing a ton of work on this. And what's so amazing to me, and you can talk about this, is that this is hiding in plain sight. The evidence is literally public. It's right there in earnings reports.
No, it is. And, my team and I have combed through hundreds of these earnings calls. And in earnings call after earnings call in every sector across a wide variety of companies, CEOs, CFOs, and corporate, executives are just saying they're jumping over themselves to talk about how their quote unquote innovative pricing strategies are allowing them to, offer even bigger payouts to shareholders, even as consumers are struggling. And the companies that I think really strike me the most are the ones that are using their market power to exploit the fact that they are not only big, but they're selling essentials. So Procter & Gamble is a really good example. The CEOs and CFOs have been so excited to talk about how much they're able to make off the backs of consumers in this moment. And part of the reason that they can do that is because they're selling things like diapers and cleaning supplies, things that, demand doesn't change for diapers based on price. You need a diaper, right?
Right.
And that puts families at an incredibly vulnerable position to price gouging, which is something that, I talked about yesterday in Congress, and really speaks to, again, how so many of these issues that we're talking about with the supply chain apply so much more broadly across our economy and often hurt the most vulnerable people the most. Because if you need a diaper and you have a small household budget, the cost of that diaper going up, it eats into your already strapped budget. So the most vulnerable people in this moment are the ones who are being taken advantage of, and all in service of making the extremely wealthy even richer.
Yeah, absolutely. And people should check out, if they can, check it out on C-SPAN or at the House Energy and Commerce Committee website, Rakeen's great testimony in a hearing about price gouging. So we just have a couple minutes left, and I want to ask you, it's one thing to talk about how we got here and how these policies created the conditions for the supply chain to be vulnerable and to break. And you mentioned briefly, you said, well, because we created it, we can fix it. So could you tell me some of the ways that we can go about doing that? Like where would you begin? It's a big problem, a lot of interconnecting issues, but where would you begin in trying to restore and revitalize our supply chain?
Yeah, I mean, I think, at Groundwork, we often talk about two things, about curbing private power and building public power. And I think those two elements apply to the supply chain as well, right? So let's use antitrust enforcement and empower the FTC to go after, big companies that are, that are really abusing their market power, let's also make big investments. I mean, we have underinvested in our supply chain for decades, in part because we handed them over to companies and allowed them to offshore and allowed them to create this really brittle system. And we can undo that by actually building in some resiliency, building in some redundancy, so that when something like COVID strikes, a crisis strikes, the entire system doesn't fall apart, because it doesn't have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, thank you, Rakeen, so much for your help and for Groundwork's help on this issue, which I know you've expressed me, and I'm just super proud of it. Rakeen Mabud is the chief economist at Groundwork Collaborative. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, great. One of my favorite pieces in this issue tells the story of a warning. And it was a warning that was made years before anyone knew any such thing about the pandemic. Before the word coronavirus was really known to people, there was this paper that was done in a little agency called the Federal Maritime Commission that pretty much nobody knows about. And this paper basically prefigured everything that we're experiencing right now at our ports. And Alex Sammon, our staff writer, wrote this piece about, it's called "We Were Warned About the Ports." And Alex, thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so tell us about this report, because it's absolutely fascinating to me that we had all the information that we really needed about what was going to happen in the event of not even a large increase in our demand and in the amount that had to go through the ports. And we knew it, and we did nothing about it. So could you tell me about this report?
Yeah, definitely. Yes, the report comes out in 2015, so almost 7 years ago now. And it sounds the alarm on the state of the ports, in particular in LA and Long Beach, which is this crucial hub for trade, especially trade with East Asia and China, which has become increasingly important thanks to these various trade deals that have kind of defined the era of economic policy. And report comes out in 2015. It uses pretty dire language, actually, saying this is an urgent issue. This was the time when the Trans-Pacific Partnership, another trade deal that was being shopped around in the last days of the Obama administration, was being considered, and it basically said, these ports are at a breaking point. There's been widespread underinvestment. There is a total lack of alignment in terms of operations. It actually goes point by point, basically identifying all the problems that we're seeing today. And it says in essence that and this is actually a direct quote, that business as usual will lead to significant further declines. And it actually even traces that back to 2005 and says, even 10 years prior to this report, we saw that we were headed for this breakdown, and that just business as usual would be enough to facilitate that. And so that forecast was slowed down by the Great Recession 2008, but by 2015 we're right back at it. And then another couple of years in the future, we arrive in 2021, and as forecasted, as prophesied, the whole thing falls apart.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important, because I think there's this general sense, if you read the media, that the pandemic broke the supply chain. There's nothing we can do. We can't change our systems just to account for a once-in-a-century pandemic. But that's not true. Like we had an advance warning that even just normal rises in demand were going to cause this. And so talk about that underinvestment, right? It's a couple things, because ports are an interesting factor in this, because that's where everything else converges, all these other problems, whether it's shipping or trucking or everything else. And the only way to get around that is to heavily invest in our ports to account for these changes that are happening around it. And we didn't do that. So could you tell me about that, that dynamic?
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting because it shows up in a lot of different ways. The ports themselves are obviously need to be growing to facilitate growth and trade. And given that, these imports are a huge part of the economic system, all these trade deals that we've pursued in various administrations over 40 years, you would expect, obviously, for the ports to grow along with the every other part of this economic system. And what you end up is you have ships getting bigger, you have containers getting bigger, you have the raw volume getting bigger, everything gets bigger, but the ports don't get bigger because that would require investment. And what happens is these private entities, whether it be giant shipping conglomerates, whether it be investment groups, they come in and they realize that there's a ton of money to be made just based on the passive operations of these systems. But if they have to put money back into it, that's going to hurt the bottom line. And so it just doesn't happen. And that manifests in a lot of different ways, but at a very basic level, there isn't enough money going into these nodes to keep up with the growth that these people were even pledging was part of the benefit of a system that was deregulated, that was reliant on imports and that leaned so heavily towards Chinese manufacturing.
And that's really critical. The fact that when people think of the ports, they might think that they're owned by the city of Los Angeles or the city of Long Beach or the city of Savannah or the city of Baltimore. And not only is that not true, what in many cases is the case is that the marine terminals, which are just sort of the gates at a particular port, are owned by either the ocean shipping companies themselves or private equity firms who have bought up various slots on the terminals. And as you say, they have no interest in investing in it because that would mean a capital expense. But people, I think, don't recognize that this is, yes, it's a public problem, but we've privatized these port operations, and that's why we're not getting the level of investment, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. There's this amazing quote in the FMC report from 2015 where they talk about the backlog, both of containers and then the backlog of trucking, that these trucks are queuing up waiting to get these containers off the docks and into various warehouses. And you would think the wholesale wellness of the system is relying on that. And there's this great line where it says that the shipping companies actually don't think that that's their problem. That the line of trucks, the 2-hour long line of trucks outside of their gates, they couldn't be convinced that was their problem because they don't own the truckers, and that's not actually, they don't have an express and acute financial interest in that, and so they couldn't even get on the same page with very simple stuff that isn't a capital expense, like expanding the hours or changing the traffic patterns to get some of this stuff unloaded, and obviously now we see that at an even more extreme degree, but the incentive structure, it gets all out of whack when you have these private interests and these huge alliances of the three main ocean shipping companies, and once that happens, it's very hard to bring them back together, and that's why solving the problem has proven so intractable.
Yeah, absolutely. It's privatization, and everyone has their own sphere of interest. And the other thing is that you have these three alliances that control 80% of global ocean shipping, and it becomes in their interest to make bigger and bigger ships. I mean, there are ships now that are the size of the Empire State Building that are going to these ports that have not either dredged or just made themselves bigger to accommodate these giant ships. And that's how you get this bottleneck. So like talk about how so few of these ports that we have in the United States are even equipped to handle the massive container ships that we now see are regular within the United States.
Right. Yeah. And it's interesting because part of the reason the traffic got so focused on LA and Long Beach is that there were smaller ports up and down the West Coast, in San Diego, in Oakland, in Seattle, Tacoma. They're kind of all, even in Vancouver. But the problem is the ships have gotten so big that most of them can't go to these places. And if you have something like a bridge in Oakland, obviously famously has many, the Bay Bridges, and or any of these other kind of smaller destinations, they can't park these ships, they can't unload these ships. And so the bigger ships all get funneled into LA and Long Beach. And then at that point, these other smaller ports, the impulse to disinvestment is even more extreme. So it all ends up in one particular area, and nowhere else you can't redirect traffic anywhere else to minimize a glut like the one we've seen. And the interesting thing actually is, as big of ships as we're seeing at LA and Long Beach, they actually aren't even the biggest ships in the system. I mean, there are much bigger ships going to ports in Europe right now from Asia, and you don't have to have an incredible long-term vision to see how, there are bigger ships on the way, and
Right.
ports in these smaller European cities have managed to facilitate the arrival of even bigger ships, and yet for us that's actually unthinkable at this point. And it shows you that, even if we're able to dig out of this current hole, the reality of the shipping industry is such that there are going to be much bigger ships heading to the west coast of the United States in really no time at all.
Yeah, you mentioned that the World Bank performance ranking of ports puts most U.S. ports, particularly LA and Long Beach, which controls, I think, about 40% of seaborne imports come through there, and they're both in the 300s out of the top 500 of ports. So obviously we've degraded. Now, one thing that you go through in the piece is the Biden administration, who gets sort of airlifted into a situation that's already completely out of control because of accumulated policy decisions made over the previous 40 years. But they're in there and they have to do something. So they try these different options, and you go through all of those options and the pluses and minuses of them. And so could you talk about, whether, just talk about the things the Biden administration has been trying to do to unclog the ports and what's actually happened?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So the first intervention was to run the ports 24 hours. And there were two big announcements made by President Biden that LA, I guess Long Beach first and then LA second, would be run 24 hours. I think that happened in the fall. Obviously, this was actually tried before, and it's mentioned in that 2015 report we keep referencing. Running the ports 24 hours is a tried and true method. It does not work, and it didn't work then. It didn't work now. Of course, you have to have every component of the supply chain running at 24 hours. If the ports are running 24 hours, if you unload containers off a ship and then just leave them on the dock, they've only moved a couple of feet. You don't solve the backlog that way. And so without being able to run running the trucking 24 hours, running the warehouses 24 hours, having support staff on call for every component of that, you can't do it. And so, we've seen just from activity logs that was never happening. It never actually manifested in any meaningful way. And that makes sense. It would take a ton of planning and hiring to make that viable. The second thing that we saw was this attempt to deal with the backlog of ships in the San Pedro Bay, which is just off the shore of LA and Long Beach. And
it's like over 100 ships are there even as we speak, right?
Yeah. So you had the triple digits, which is, was a record-breaking number, and no matter what they did, they couldn't get those numbers down. And so what ended up happening was a decision I don't even think was made by the White House, but by local groups for environmental reasons, was that they moved the ships further offshore. So they basically moved them out of sight. Right. So the queuing seemed less extreme. The parking lot that has been much maligned over the last handful of months of 100 ships stacked in a row waiting to get in there is no longer visible from the shore. But the problem hasn't abated at all. It's just been displaced by a couple 100 miles. And so now we got these ships queuing just much further out. So that is another sort of non-solution that was attempted. And then the biggest one I think that is worth mentioning is the container dwell fee. So this was something that was announced that the shipping companies would be penalized for leaving their empty containers on the docks and basically using the docks as free warehouse space for storage and
even their cargo and their containers. I think it was separate fees for each.
Yeah. That's correct. Yeah. And this practice has been in place for a long time. Actually, the ports have advertised this to shippers as an asset that they offer as an amenity of sorts. And so they announced that they were going to implement this fee because the dock space was so overloaded with these towering stacks of containers and cargo. And
right.
Of course, that that was announced. I think also in the fall, it was pushed back in October, pushed back in November, pushed back in December, pushed back in January.
Right.
It's another one of these things that even if it were to be implemented, there are already massive financial incentives in place from the ports themselves. They pay substantially to the shipping companies for using their to incentivize them to use one port over the other. And it wouldn't have made a meaningful difference, even if it had been implemented in terms of the financial picture here.
Right.
So the dock space did get cleared. Maybe the announcement made a difference, but it wasn't because of the penalties, because the penalties were never put in place.
Right. Great. Well, we just have a couple minutes, and we are starting to see some investment through the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. There was $17 billion earmarked for ports, and we're starting to see some of that money go out in grants. But I mean, at the end, you kind of talk about this being more than just investment, that there needs to be a real rethinking of how we orient and engineer our ports in order for there to be success. Could you talk about that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, obviously money is one aspect of this. I didn't come away with the sense that just throwing money at this would solve it. The one thing that's really critical, I think, is just getting everyone on the same page logistically, and
Yeah.
the sense that I think is so interesting that you get from talking to people involved in this is that people don't know where the stuff is at any point. I mean, even in the White House, even the big corporations whose stuff is coming from China, coming from Vietnam, or anywhere in East Asia on these ships, they don't know where the hell their stuff is. It's on a boat, it's on a ship, they don't know which one. And there's no visibility really on operations at all. And so no one has any sense of what's going on. And without that, it's very difficult to solve these problems in any meaningful way. And so, there's precedent for how to deal with this. The European ports do have a totally aligned system. Someone told me that for trucking, someone was picking up from the ports, they had to log into 11 different systems just to figure out where to go and what to get. So you have these totally unaligned systems, and that sort of stuff is beyond just investment in hard infrastructure, is going to be a crucial part of kind of going forward.
Great. Well, it's a fabulous report. Thank you for coming on and telling everybody about it. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks.
All right. One thing I didn't mention in that report with Alex was about trucking, which is a key node of transportation, a key piece of the supply chain. And the reason I didn't mention is that we have Harold Meyerson, our editor at large, who did an entire piece about the trucking aspect of this. Harold, welcome.
Always good to be here, David.
Okay, great. So this, I think, is a really fascinating part of this, because it shows how the global logistics system ideally was supposed to work for corporations, not for the people actually doing the work, but for corporations. That the only way that they could essentially en masse move manufacturing offshore is if they ground down the cost of moving that material across the country. And this is exactly what they've done. So, I mean, you start by talking to a particular port truck driver, and tell me about his experience of what he does at the ports.
Sure. There are about 12,000 drivers who go to the ports of Los Angeles and Long Beach, where 40% of all the imports into the United States arrive, and cart the containers, I don't know, 50, 60 miles to this massive group of warehouses in what's called the Inland Empire, where the containers are emptied, resorted, put on other containers, and taken to every Walmart or Target or Costco or Lowe's or what have you within 1,000 miles. So these guys are really central to the American supply chain. That said, Omar and his fellow workers work for one of the big companies there, XPO Logistics. The problem is that XPO Logistics doesn't consider them employees. It insists that they're independent contractors, despite the fact that they're leasing their trucks from XPO or some allied company. They nonetheless don't qualify, therefore, for benefits. They have to pay for their own gas, their own maintenance. And the UC Berkeley Labor Center did a survey of these drivers and found that after they pay for the lease and pay for the gas and pay for the maintenance and pay for repairs, they make a grand total of about $28,000 a year. Therefore, I mean, most of the drivers are immigrants. They live kind of day to day. Omar said that when he needs medical care, he doesn't take the truck. He gets in his car and drives to Tijuana because he's not covered under Medicaid. And that's his life. So there is a lawyer, Julie Gutman Dickinson, working for drivers like this. And she got the state to rule that the XPO is misclassifying them, and XPO agreed to pay hundreds of drivers $30 million in back pay and fines. But that is cheaper for XPO than to actually say they're employees. So there they sit in this ridiculous category of misclassified independent contractor.
Yeah, it's amazing. We'll get into the misclassification issue a little bit later, but what I want to talk about first is that in the grand scheme of history, this is a relatively new development in terms of truckers being independent contractors and the trucking system itself being deregulated. Could you talk about how the system was prior to the changes that were made in the Carter administration?
Yes, the trucking up until 1980 was regulated by an act passed in 1935. At that point, railroads had been regulated forever, so they didn't bilk the American public, and trucking was growing, and interstate trucking was beginning to become a phenomenon by the mid-1930s. And so Congress passed the Motor Carrier Bill of 1935, which basically, in the spirit of a lot of legislation during the Great Depression, tried to keep the industry from racing to the bottom. The whole economy had raced to the bottom. Layoffs, wage cuts, really the worst economy Americans have ever experienced in the midst of the Great Depression. And Congress and the Roosevelt administration didn't want that to happen. So they gave the Interstate Commerce Commission the power to regulate rates for trucking companies, so they wouldn't be undercut by someone who comes in with a couple of trucks or more than a couple of trucks and charges less and pays the drivers much less. Given that floor, the Teamster Union began to organize interstate truckers and did a fabulous job. This is the positive side of Jimmy Hoffa. We know what the negative side of Jimmy Hoffa was, but he did a brilliant job. And by the mid-1960s, he succeeded in getting his members to support and getting virtually every interstate trucking company to support a master freight agreement, it was called, that called for the unionization of the employees of about 1,000 trucking companies. More than 450,000. This was hailed by the New York Times as a significant event in 20th century history. It gave them decent wages. It gave them benefits. It gave them a defined benefit pension, for Lord's sake. And so trucking in the mid 20th century became, as you ranked blue collar jobs, it was actually one of the very better ones, one of the best.
And then this changes in 1980 with changes more generally in willingness to accept deregulation. And you go over this really brilliantly in the piece. Talk about the forces that led to the deregulation of trucking.
Well, there was obviously a spike in inflation, the first serious one the nation had seen in a very long time, beginning in the mid-1970s. And a lot of that was caused by the coming together of OPEC and the concomitant rise in the price of oil and fossil fuel and gas at the pump. And obviously, this greatly affected the transportation sector, airplane companies, railroads, and truckers had to shell out more to cover this. And it was seen as one of the major forces behind inflation. At the same time, the Democratic Party was changing perversely because it gained a lot of strength in reaction to Watergate, understandably enough. But where it gained that strength, I mean, the Democrats already won in big cities. This began to give them suburbs that were still historically Republican, people who were just had it with Richard Nixon, and created a new breed of Democrat in Congress who, like some of his or her constituents, might have been, you know, pretty liberal on social issues, not so liberal on economic issues. And, you know, honestly, there weren't a lot of truckers living in those folks' districts. Right. So, you know, the consumer movement, even heroes of the consumer movement like Ralph Nader, got behind this idea that we need to deregulate transportation, the airlines, some of the rails, and trucking. And labor unions had been weakening in strength. The Teamsters were kind of even an outlier among laborers because they were seen not wrongly as in many ways corrupt. Sometimes,
well, pursuant to that, you talk about this flailing attempt by the Teamsters to stop this freight train of deregulation. And so tell me about that.
Flailing is the word. You know, the Teamsters were used to practicing politics by writing checks. They wrote checks. In the case of Watergate, they funneled cash to Nixon to pay off the first tranche of convicts so they wouldn't rat on the higher ups. But they weren't a union at that point that could mobilize members and bring the usual kinds of political pressure on Congress. So the vice president of the Teamsters, who was shortly to become the president of the Teamsters, Roy Williams, and some other folks, met with the senator from Nevada, who was the chair of the Senate Commerce Committee, and, you know, said, can you please, cut a deal with us somehow to kill this coming deregulation of trucking. And according to later phone conversations that the FBI recorded with some of the Teamsters who were in the meetings, those Teamsters said that Senator Cannon, that was Howard Cannon, that was the name of the senator, said, well, yeah, can you essentially give me 6 acres in Vegas that I'm trying to buy? Since this was tape recorded, the Teamster leaders eventually ended up in jail. Howard Cannon was not indicted, but lost re-election. And the deregulation bill passed, and it passed in the House by something like 370 to 13. Everyone was for it. Ted Kennedy led the charge on this, even as he was running for president in the primary against Jimmy Carter. He and Carter combined to push this bill through. And I don't think any of those folks really understood what would happen as a result.
Right. And what has come to pass as a result of what you were talking about at the top. And I think there's a crucial point here, because the dominant conversation around trucking and this crisis is that we have a trucker shortage. But what we really seem to have is a good job shortage.
Absolutely.
And so tell me about that and what the deregulation, how it contributed to the good job shortage that we have.
As soon as the deregulation passed and there were no longer rates that dealt with, you know, how high and how low truckers could charge, the field just exploded. All kinds of people. It didn't, you know, you don't need a lot of capital to set up a little trucking enterprise. You get a couple of trucks, right. And they could undercut the established competitors. And they did that by reducing the pay of truckers. There's some studies that show that in the 2 decades after this act passed in 1980, trucker income fell by between 30 and 40%. And the Bureau of Labor Statistics has said that hasn't gone up since then, even though the cost of living has increased somewhat since 2000. So it became the technical term, I don't know if you can say this on this, but the technical term is it became a shit job. You know, whether or not you were misclassified as an independent contractor, that's what many long haul truckers are. And it became a job which a lot of people enter, but a lot of people leave. There's even one study by a Bureau of Labor Statistics economist and an economist at University of Minnesota that said that the yearly turnover rate of long haul truckers is 94%. Well, if your goods aren't showing up on the shelves, that might have some relation to that, and some relation to the fact that the American Trucking Association says we're about 80,000 truckers shy of what we need right now.
Yeah. All right. We have a few minutes left, and let's try to move to a slightly more, or I guess a less depressing note.
Yes.
There are some changes that are going on through Joe Biden's NLRB, through some labor lawyers and things like that. Tell us about the movement to change some of the standards within the trucking industry.
Well, lawyers have been handling the case of the misclassified truckers at the Port of LA. One of those lawyers, Julie Gutman Dickinson, has said that, well, you know, the National Labor Relations Act guarantees workers' right to a collective voice and so on. And misclassification, therefore, should be viewed as an inherent violation of that. So, in fact, there's a new lawsuit from those truckers brought to the NLRB, not to a court, saying we're misclassified. You should rule we're employees, and therefore, parentheses, therefore we could unionize. And the NLRB now has members and a general counsel, Jennifer Abruzzo, who has indicated that, you know, that might well be a very plausible argument. In that case, you could begin to see a whole lot of not just independent, not just those kinds of truckers, but truckers labeled as independent contractors who really work for FedEx, who really work for Amazon, who really drive for Uber, who really drive for Lyft. You know, that could be said to be the ducks who quack and walk like ducks and really are ducks. They're really employees. So we will see where this goes at the NLRB. It doesn't address the many long haul truckers who are not misclassified. That's going to take, you know, some worker militants. It's going to take a lot of changes, primarily just taking blue collar work seriously again in America.
Right, and ultimately a rollback of this deregulation.
Yes.
Well, look, Harold, thank you so much for this piece. Really fascinating history. I mean, this is what I love about this issue, is that we really go back to the origins of this. This was not a failure that happened in a day or a week or even a year. The seeds of this go back decades. So
They do.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
All right. Okay, we're going to move on now. We have one last guest here. And this is sort of after we go through all the rigmarole of the supply chain, we get to the retail facility. And there's a stark difference between how retailers that are very large and have a lot of resources are handling these supply chain issues relative to smaller businesses. And so we're going to talk about that with Rose Adams, who's an independent journalist in New York City. Rose, hello.
How are you?
Yeah, very good. Very good. Thank you for being here. So you tell this story, the piece that you wrote is called Big Business Games, the Supply Chain. And it's really fascinating to me, the ways in which larger businesses are dealing with this, sometimes at the expense of smaller businesses. So could you talk about, maybe to start, some of the strategies that the big box stores, the Walmarts, the Home Depots, the Amazons, the strategies they're using to deal with the supply chain disruptions?
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. They've kind of been able to use all these things that they've started planning for years in advance. You know, their different supply chain mechanisms, their ability to charter ships. These are things that a lot of big companies, especially Amazon and Walmart, have sort of been building their capabilities for before the supply chain crisis and before COVID. But because of all the supply chain backups, it sort of accelerated some of the changes we're already seeing. Amazon continued to expand its its supply chain logistics network. It chartered its own ships, and this was something that you really didn't see much of before. And most ships, as I'm sure you've already discussed, kind of come in to the U.S. Most goods come in on freight forwarding carriers. It's not something that is completely integrated, but Amazon has been, rather than having a separate freight forwarding carrier import their stuff, just having their own chartered ships that sort of get everything from point A to point B. And they're already expanding their logistics network and building hundreds of new warehouses. So there are tons of different ways that they're able to kind of use their power. They have a new airport, Amazon does, a new airport hub that's been in the works for a few years that allows them to use their air freight, which they use to transport expensive high goods that are really in high demand, like iPhones and things like that. So yeah, they're hiring a ton of people to help with work all these supply chain needs, and they're able to just kind of be a little bit more nimble in the way that they approach and respond to these problems, just because they can throw so much money and so many resources at it.
Absolutely, yeah, and you contrast that with sort of this individual who you use as a through line through the piece, this guy Jimmy Wright, who's a grocery store owner in Opelika, Alabama, who, needless to say, cannot charter his own ship if he wants to get inventory. So talk about the struggles of sort of a smaller independent business like that relative to the giants like Amazon.
Right. So, someone like Jimmy, and, also he's an independent grocer. There are also a lot of toy stores and other retail stores that suffer. They have to basically wait in line. All this big port congestion slows down the process, sometimes by a month for imported goods. And they have to wait in that long line for a month to get these goods, which makes things really expensive. They have to deal with a container shortage. They have to pay really high rates for containers. And they don't have any shortcuts to use. They can't be building out their supply chain. They have to just wait with everyone else. And the reason that it hurts them so much when someone like a big box player like Amazon or Walmart or Dollar Tree or anyone is able to cut that line is that consumer expectations are then adjusted because they're able to get these goods from Amazon or Walmart quickly. The consumer doesn't necessarily know that there are all these supply chain failures except for what they're reading in the news. So, others are paying huge amounts of money to import goods, but Amazon and Walmart are kind of creating this false impression that no, things don't, they don't have to pass on the cost to the customer, and they don't have to sacrifice, time or anything really. So yeah, it's basically creates this bigger contrast and drives this wedge between how big companies and small companies can do business and the prices they can offer and how quickly they can deliver their goods and get their goods.
Right. And ultimately a consumer sees that and says, if I want to know that I'm going to get my laundry detergent, I'm going to go to Walmart. I'm not going to go to Jimmy's market in Opelika. But you talk about this in an even more fine-grained way. And one of the fascinating parts of this piece is you talk about how Walmart and some of these other big box stores dictate to their suppliers that they need to get the supplies first. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. That's also something that has predated the pandemic, but has definitely been accelerated because of these different kind of bottlenecks in the supply chain. Walmart is especially, publicly a company that's known to do this and has done it for years, but Amazon too has been able to strike deals with suppliers, especially in publishing and in different industries where they're, they can use their market power and the fact that they drive so many sales to make special demands of suppliers, demand lower prices, demand priority when there's a shortage of supply. Walmart, for example, in 2020, I think late 2020, sent an email to all their vendors basically saying that they would get a fee. The vendors would have to pay a fee if they didn't deliver 98% of Walmart's orders on time and in full, which, might sound like a reasonable request to a person. Like if you make an order, you expect it to be delivered, but that's not really how it works in the world of, big box buying. I mean, a lot of stores are buying huge quantities of orders, and just because you make the order doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to get delivered right when you need it, especially if there's a bunch of supply chain issues. So by making those demands of their suppliers, Walmart is forcing them to keep costs low, keep them, keep make Walmart its priority, and then in exchange, neglect the smaller buyers that are trying to buy goods from these same suppliers.
And the effect of that is that it starts to raise costs to other companies outside of Walmart's orbit. So this is yet another event that creates this wedge between bigger and smaller players, because now only the bigger players have the ability to keep their prices really low.
Right.
So I mean, in that sense, and you talk about this sort of more broadly in the piece, the supply chain crisis that we're seeing right now has become kind of a consolidating event. And you put some numbers to that in terms of how small businesses have been going under during the pandemic, while larger businesses are taking more market share. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, well, we'll see some of that more too as the amount that Amazon has made over 2021 becomes clear. I guess or later today we'll see what their earnings were. But throughout their Amazon has and other companies have been able to just keep profits not as their kind of priority at the moment. They're really focusing on building out their network and having them be the retail source that people turn to, and kind of change consumer habits by just being consistent and low priced and quick. And so they're not having to really having to focus on kind of bigger picture existential crises of keeping prices low or keeping business going. But yeah, smaller businesses definitely have to deal with that kind of thing every day. I mean, 800,000, I think it was 800,000 small businesses closed in the first year of the pandemic, and a lot of small businesses close every year, so it's not like that was a crazy number that was more than usual. It's kind of like everything else, sort of part of a larger pattern, but just a kind of accelerated pattern. And so it definitely having the consolidation factor and having people shopping online more than they used to and expecting one-day delivery and prime delivery, that's something that small businesses are just going to continue having to fight even more as the years.
So I mean, I guess some people listening to this might think, all right, so prices are still low at Walmart. What's the big deal? But you work out in the piece, and it's a really great analysis of what it means to have this consolidation in retail and what that means for workers, what that means for communities and things like that. So could you tell us about the consequences of this consolidation?
For sure. Yeah. And that's an interesting point, because I think it really is easy, especially everyone's really a consumer. It's easy as a consumer to just do what's easiest for you and pay the lowest price. And I think there's been a real movement, especially kind of a bipartisan movement, but pretty big on the progressive side too, that big is better and cheaper is better. And really what we should be concerned with is keeping prices low, because that's what consumers want. But it's sort of a short-sighted strategy if you think about it a bit, because if you think about the history also of monopolization, that is the way that monopolies happen, is prices become low, you drive out consumers, and that's all well and good for consumers and people living, in the present moment. But then once there's a true monopoly, which there isn't now, there's still competition. That's when you see changes happen. And if you're focused on consumer access and low prices, then even that is affected potentially by, huge monopolies. That's once they are in power, they can drive up prices. You saw that a ton in the Gilded Age and those eras of those huge trusts. So, in terms of both on the consumer side, there is a long-term effect, but also on the worker side, there's this idea that big companies pay more, that they're more equitable, that they're better for their employees. And that used to be more true than it is now. And especially now, if you look at the bottom 50% of employees at big companies versus small companies, there really isn't any difference in how what the pay is and what the benefits are. There's wages at big companies have been falling pretty steadily over the years. So that's kind of an outdated notion that it doesn't really hold water anymore. But I think really what small businesses have to offer is like they're more nimble, they can adapt to the supply chain more, and they they're kind of part of the community, and more money that is spent there is then invested into communities. So they're kind of part of a larger ecosystem rather than just sort of sucking money out of a neighborhood that won't, then see investment again.
Yeah. And of course, it should be said that if an Amazon and a Walmart are throwing money into literally chartering container ships, that money that's spent, that's not an investment that they're making that they don't expect to recoup at some point or another. And we are seeing higher prices kind of across the sector, and so the broken supply chain is already creating the price pressure. But if it's consolidating as well, then you give that opportunity to those businesses to do that even more. And yeah, the community aspect of it, because you talk to people, in Alabama and elsewhere in the piece, and yeah, we've seen this for years. Like the Walmart by the interstate services everyone's needs, and the main street downtown in these small towns ends up withering away. I mean, what was your takeaway from talking to some of these people who see that happening in their communities?
Yeah, I think, there is something intuitively sad about having small businesses close. And I think it's not just an aesthetic thing of wanting there to be a cute little main street. There's a real service that small businesses offer. And in one small town whose mayor I spoke to in East Alabama, they used to have a grocery store like most towns, and they would have fresh produce and fresh meat at this grocery store that was on their kind of main street. And, for different reasons, it wasn't just big box competition, although there probably was some of that because a Dollar Tree opened up nearby. That store closed, and so they don't have a grocery store anymore. So people have to do all the shopping they can at Dollar Tree. But unlike Walmart, which really does have a lot of options in terms of grocery, Dollar Tree is just, packaged goods. So, not only did they lose a business that was investing in the community and, a convenience factor and kind of maybe higher quality stuff, but they just lost access to produce, like access to basic food that they need. And so, now they're driving 30 minutes to the closest city to get just produce.
Yeah.
And so that's a really tangible need. It's like kind of the basis of a community is access to food. And so when you take out the business that can offer you that, then that's more than just a small little loss that can be replaced.
Great. We have a couple minutes left. One thing I thought was interesting in the piece that maybe you can expand on here is the ways in which small businesses are trying to show their value and survive are interesting. Using specialty kind of items or using local supply chains that might be even more robust or less or more resilient than some of the longer ones. Could you tell us about some of these tactics that are being used?
Yeah, and this is kind of the more hopeful side of it for small businesses. They, especially during COVID, a lot of businesses were able to pivot really quickly and offer takeout and offer different services, offer like boxes so people could make food at home or construct things at home. And I think they've also been able, or in a lot of industries, to capitalize on trends of more consumer consciousness and being a sustainable brand, and having that be the reason that you charge more for products is because they're sustainably made, they're good for the environment, they are made by workers who are paid well. You see that in clothing and food. Of course, people are thinking more about buying food that's especially meat that comes from a sustainable and ethical source. So some of these ideas about consumer consciousness, not everything has to be just cheap and convenient, are kind of coming into the conversation. And I think over time, once that sort of becomes a responsibility, there's some more consumer responsibility that everyone's expected of, that could be something that small businesses can really continue to leverage as the way that they're selling themselves, and kind of the reason that they're not as fast and as cheap as Amazon.
All right, great. Well, Rose, it's a terrific piece. Thank you so much for writing it, and thank you for being with us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Absolutely. This has been our How We Broke the Supply Chain special event. You can read every single one of these pieces for this issue at prospect.org/supply chain. And we're really happy to bring this to you. It was a really great experience, really digging into this. And hope you enjoy it and get something out of it, and learn about how we got this way, how the supply chain broke, and how we can fix it. So once again, this is Dayen from the American Prospect, and have a good day.